Okay, so if you do have a Bible, do have John chapter 10 open. And if you were lost by the reading earlier where Jesus is talking about being a sheep and having other sheep and having a sheepfold and being a shepherd, hopefully this will make it a little bit clearer, or some aspects of it a little bit clearer. Because this morning we're thinking about how Jesus is the good shepherd. That's what we're thinking about. What does it mean to say Jesus is the good shepherd? And if we're going to get to the depths of what he means when he says that, then there is a little bit of a process that we have to go through. We can't just say Jesus is a good shepherd, okay. We have to go through a process. And the start of the process is this. Forget everything you know about modern sheep farming. Forget everything you know about that. Forget about what you might have seen in the UK. So that picture up on the screen, ignore that. It's not that, because the kind of shepherd we're talking about is vastly different. So don't have in your mind Wales with lush green fields all over the place and it constant raining to make it green. Don't think of that. Don't think of grass constantly being replenished as fast as sheep can eat it. Don't think of flocks being left to their own devices on hillsides, inside walls and inside fences with minimal dangers around them. Don't picture one man and his dog. If anyone has ever watched that program, don't picture one man and his dog. Don't watch one man and his dog. Because it's a rubbish program. I've lost my train of thought. Don't picture one man and his dog. Don't picture someone on a quad bike like Philip, driving like a maniac across the fields, driving sheep along. Don't picture that, because the picture of a shepherd in the Bible is vastly different. The life of an ancient Middle Eastern shepherd was not like what you see on the screen. It was a bit more like this. Think of a desert, which periodically bursts into blooms of vegetation at the time when it's going to rain. But most of the time, looks a bit like what you see on the screen at the minute. Think about a place where it is difficult to find fresh water. It's not just in a trough for them, but you have to take sheep to a place where you can water them. Think of a place where it's dangerous for a sheep to be because of the terrain, for one, but also the fact that there are tons and tons of predators and there are thieves. Think of the shepherd not driving his sheep along with a dog from the rear, but leading them. He's at the front and they follow him. Don't think of a shepherd who gets his sheep to do what he wants by fear of the dog biting them, but because they trust him and they follow him. He leads them to food. He leads them to shelter. He leads them to water, and he will take on whatever dangers come in their way. Have in mind that kind of scenario, a place where it is dangerous to be a sheep, so that you have to trust your shepherd no matter what. No matter what. In fact, it's a type of shepherd that still exists today. When preparing for this morning, I read about an incident in Palestine in 1980 where the Israeli army wanted to punish a Palestinian village, and what they did is they gathered all of the sheep from the village, they put them in a barbed wire pen, and they were going to keep them. And later that week, a woman approached the commander of the army and begged him to release her flock, begged him, because her husband was gone and these sheep were her only hope of survival. The commander of the army, he pretty much laughed in her face and said he couldn't do that because it would be impossible to tell which sheep were hers and which sheep were someone else's. So she asks another question. If she can separate them out, would he release them? He laughs, but he agrees, and he arranges for the door of the pen to be opened. At which point the little boy next to the woman pulls out a small flute and he starts playing the same tune over and over and over again. Inside the pen, 25 pairs of ears, pricked up. And they follow, as the little boy walked away, they followed him home. Because they knew who he was, they knew the tune, and they trusted him. That's the kind of image of a shepherd you need to have in the back of your minds when you look at how Jesus is a good shepherd. He is that kind of shepherd. We're going to come back to that in a bit. We're going to come back to what kind of shepherd Jesus is, but there's another thing we have to do as well. If we have to get the image of the shepherd right, we also have to realize something else as well. In this story that Jesus tells, we are sheep. We are sheep as people. And let's be honest, that's not overly flattering, is it? Not even in English, it's not flattering to be called a sheep. If we want to tell someone that they are unthinking and they just do stuff without any regard for what's going on around them, we tell them not to be a sheep. Has anyone ever said that to you? Don't be a sheep. We will call unthinking groups of people sheeple in a derogatory way. And if Jesus is the good shepherd, we are sheep. And that is as unflattering as it sounds. Jesus did not say, I am the good cat owner. He said, I am the good shepherd. He did not say, I know my cats and my cats know me. He picked sheep, and he picked that for one reason. Sheep are dumb. Sheep are really, really dumb. If you own a cat and you open the door for it to go out, after going in and out and in and out for an eternity, at some point it will go out and it knows something as it leaves your house. It is free and it can handle itself. If it does not want to come back in, it will not come back in. If it gets somewhere where you can't find it, it will find its way home eventually. And if it can find a slightly warmer house with slightly better food, it will ditch you in a heartbeat. Jesus did not say, I am the great cat owner, you are cats. He said sheep because sheep are dumb. Release a sheep into the wild and it will say, okay, what now? What am I supposed to do now? They follow each other around. They wander into danger. They make no distinction between desert and field, between riverbed and brook of water. They can fall over and get stuck. I only learned that this week. It's possible for a sheep to fall on its back and have no idea how to right itself. Sheep are incredibly stupid. They are also vulnerable. No one has ever bred an attack sheep, not to my knowledge anyway. Sheep versus wolf always ends a certain way, and it's not good for the sheep. They are helpless, they're unable to defend themselves, and they are delicious as well. Let's be honest, they are delicious. And if Jesus is a good shepherd, and his people are like dumb sheep, then what do you and I have to realize about ourselves in this picture? Just like sheep are dependent on a shepherd, if you're a follower of Jesus, you are completely and utterly dependent upon him. You are as dumb as a sheep. That's a really flattering thing to say. If you try to go it alone in any area of your life, you are going to head for disaster. So that's where we start off with. And I do realize that is incredibly insulting. But if you have to remember, I'm included in this as well. I am as dumb a sheep as they come as well. And it could be, maybe you don't agree with that so far. Maybe you're thinking, how dare he say such a thing? I'm not that big of a mess. I'm not like an animal that falls on its back and has no idea how to get back up. Well, just to increase the insult a little bit further, let me try and demonstrate to you just how sheep-like you are. So I want to prove this to you. Think back to your 16-year-old self. So you as a 16-year-old, and as a 16-year-old, you're thinking about who you were as a 10-year-old. So we're kind of doing an inception thing with our imagination. Imagine one thing and then go a little bit deeper. What does your 16-year-old self think of your 10-year-old self? I would imagine it's something like this. Your 16-year-old self is saying, I was so naive and so foolish at 10. I was uninformed. I did stupid things. I am so much cleverer now. What do you think of your 16-year-old self? You think, I was so naive and so foolish and I was so uninformed. I was an idiot back then. Now let's do something else. What will the version of you in 10 years' time think of you today? What will they think? They will probably think, I was so naive and so foolish and so uninformed. 10 years ago, I would have said with confidence, I am never going to use an iPad to get a few minutes peace from my children. I knew nothing. I knew absolutely nothing. I was naive. And that's the thing with who we are as people. We are always just getting over our stupid stage. Always. But I can guarantee you that something in the next 10 years you will look back on and say, I can't believe I did that. I can't believe I could have been so stupid. And the reason that this is true is that you're a sheep and I'm a sheep. We're all sheep. We just don't recognize how much of a sheep we are. So if that's true, how should we live? If we're sheep and Jesus is the great shepherd, well, step one is this. Recognize that that very unflattering picture of yourself is true. That's the first thing you've got to do. You've got to say, spiritually speaking, I am a sheep. And left to my own devices, left to your own devices, we are going to make a mess. And what you then have to do is trust what Jesus said. So last week, Greg would have talked about the shepherd who wants to lead you into an abundant life. To do that, he might lead you through a desert at times. He might lead you through a desert to get to where you need to be. You know, when Jesus was telling this little story to the people who were listening originally, bubbling around in the back of their minds was probably Psalm 23. It's the psalm which is famously read out at funerals. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guards me in paths of righteousness. When I walk through life and death looms over me like a shadow, we'll feel nothing because he's with us. That's what Jesus promises to do. Lead us through life in such a way that no matter what happens, no matter what, without any exceptions, we can endure it with hope because we trust the one who's leading us. But if you're going to experience that, if you're going to experience the blessing that Jesus wants to bring, you have to be like a sheep who trusts implicitly, who hears a tune and follows. So that means something. Jesus is your shepherd and not your vet. He is your guide in everything. He is not your consultant. He's not your consultant. How does this work in real life? Well, on one level, it's about your decisions. So if you're one of Jesus' sheep, you can be certain of this. If you ignore what he says to do, it's not going to end well. It's not going to end well. If you ignore his guidance, it won't go well for you. You'll be wandering around and eventually you'll get trouble, but if you follow him, it will be for your good. It's one thing you have to learn. And so it comes down to things like this. When you know what Jesus says about a part of your life, about how it should work, do you say, I'm going to listen to him and I'm going to do it? Or am I going to say no? So do you say to him, okay, Jesus, you can have control of this area of my life over here, but don't think for a moment that you'll influence my career. If you say that to him, you're a sheep that's going to wander off. If you say to him, okay, I'll let you into my career and you can guide my job and sort out my ethics at my workplace, but stay out of my love life, then you're a sheep who's going to wander off. If you say to him, I will honor you with my sexuality, Jesus, but my money is mine to do with as I please at all times, you will wander into trouble at some point in your life. If you say anything like that to Jesus, I'll obey you here but not here, or I'll obey you in this area but not this area, he's not really your shepherd. You're a sheep that's going to wander off. Those of us who've been Christians a while, can you think of someone who was a brilliant Christian, fantastic, except for one area of their life? And can you look at them now and think, they disobeyed and everything's gone wrong from that moment? I can think of a few. Or maybe you look at yourself and you look at your history and say, if I just obeyed, it would have been so much different. This passage says, obey him in everything. If you choose to make Jesus your consultant, it will go wrong. The call of this passage is trust him with every area of your life. So trust him with your decisions, but how else does it come across to us? It's not merely decisions that we have to trust him with. It's a state of mind that we have to adopt every single day because we're sheep and we get things wrong. So one of the things you might have to do is, at this moment right now, decide, I'm going to be dependent on Jesus in everything. And I listened to a sermon this week where the preacher said on this, if you're going to be dependent on Jesus, if you're really going to be dependent on him, plan your day. Plan your day. Look at what's going to happen in your day and try and work out in advance where are your temptations going to be. So if you know you have a meeting at work and there's going to become a moment where the incompetence of others is going to drive you mad, you have to ask God in advance, make me patient when that happens, because you've been patient to me. If you're heading for a meeting at work and you know your incompetence is going to be shown up for everyone to see, ask him to help you to be honest and not take someone down with you, or maybe pass the buck on to someone else. Be honest. If you know that in your day you're going to face a moment where your success is going to be praised and the little proud version of you is going to go, yes, I love this, ask him to help you to turn the glory his way. That's what it means to be his sheep. If you fail, trust him there as well. Trust him with every single part of your life. One of the tests you can do to see if you are really one of Jesus' sheep is this. Decide right now to rely on him in advance. Rely on him this week. Think right now where you're going to need him in the next 7 days and decide right now, I'm going to trust him in that moment. So you've got to trust him with everything. And there's one last thing before we go back towards looking at Jesus as the Good Shepherd. You've got to follow him joyfully. You know, it's possible to obey what Jesus says and to rely on him and hate every second of it and do it through gritted teeth. It's possible to do that. But I want to encourage you to trust him joyfully this morning. You might not always understand why he says do what he wants you to do. You might not always get it, but he certainly doesn't want you doing it through gritted teeth. He wants you to do it joyfully. We're going to think about how we do that in a minute. But one thing you've got maybe just to get in place to start with is this. You are not like a small child on holiday. When I was a small child on holiday with my parents, there was one phrase I always hated hearing. It was just 5 words. It was, let's go for a walk. Because in my experience, that was always understood in a certain way. This is going to be long. This is going to be boring. And thirdly, it's going to be to walk to a place that I'm not interested in. And more or less every single time that was proved right. God is not like that. He does not say, follow me, let's go for a walk. He's going to lead you to what is best. He's going to lead you towards joy. He's going to lead you towards blessing. And he wants you to trust that that's what he's doing, even if you don't get where you're going, even if you don't understand where you're going. He wants us to be joyful followers. And if you're wondering how that's possible, we have to switch our attention now back to the shepherd. Because I want to show you 3 ways how Jesus is awe-inspiring and he should make you trust him joyfully. 3 ways. And hopefully they should get more awe-inspiring as we go along. That's the plan anyway. So, look at verse 12. Jesus says he is not like a hired hand who does not own the sheep. So when the wolf comes, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Jesus is not like a hired hand who doesn't own the sheep and doesn't care about them. He cares for them deeply. And it's a really simple illustration Jesus gives here. When danger comes, a hired shepherd will abandon his post every time. Every single time. Why would he do that? Because the sheep aren't his. He's only getting paid to look after the sheep. Therefore, if the danger is big enough, he's going to leg it, because whether the sheep survive or not is not really that important to him. Whereas, in the world that Jesus lived, if you were the shepherd, you owned the sheep. They were yours and they were your wealth. You didn't have a bank that you went to bank all of your takings from keeping sheep. Your sheep were your wealth. Every part of them was valuable. The wool, the meat, everything. Sheep were your treasure. And in exactly the same way as a shepherd would treasure his flock and go off and search for the lost one, as Jesus talks about, Jesus values his people. You are his treasure. You're his treasure. And if you throw in a couple of other parts of the Bible, we can see how we are God's treasure. So Jesus values his people the way a bridegroom values his bride. Now that should be quite a lot. A bridegroom on his wedding day should have eyes for no one else but the bride. And if he does, he's in a world of trouble. Jesus treasures us like that. There are places where it talks about God rejoicing over his people with singing. God rejoices over you. You're his treasure. If you wander off and you get lost, he will go out and he'll find you and he'll bring you back because you are treasure. Now just let that settle in you for a minute. You are God's treasure. You are Jesus' treasure. You might not think it about yourself, but you are. He says that about you. Let that settle to start with. And now let's go deeper and let's see something better. So look at verse 14. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep. That's what Jesus says. I know my sheep. Jesus knows you to the very depths of who you are. He knows you better than anyone else knows you. And that is an incredible thing. Because those moments when you do something that surprises you and you think, I never thought I could do something like that. He knows you and he knew you were going to do it before you did it. If you ever find yourself saying something which you thought, I never believed those words come out of my mouth. He knew that you were going to say it. And you're still his treasure. Those parts of your character that you don't want anyone to see, he knows them completely. He knows them completely. Those things about your past that you try and hide, he knows all them. He even knows the things that you are going to get right and you're going to get wrong in the future, and you are still his treasure. He knows you completely. There's a song that we sing that has the line in it, he sees the depths of your heart and he loves you the same. He sees the depths of you and he loves you. So let that settle as well. He knows you and he still loves you. And again, let's take it deeper. Let's take it to the ultimate place. Let's go to verse 15. I'm the good shepherd and I lay down my life for the sheep. In those few words, Jesus shows us the depth of his commitment to us. He literally says, I will lay down my life in the place of my sheep. Literally says that, in the place of them. And that's where that story from the tsunami in Indonesia really hits home. That air traffic controller is an illustration of what Jesus did. That guy laid down his life for the people on the plane. It's an incredible story of sacrifice. It really is. Like I was saying earlier, the pilot describes him as a hero and as a guardian angel. And he even says that when he tried to radio back as he took off, he was just met with silence. That kind of story should move us. And I could see earlier on it did move you. It's an illustration of what Jesus has done for you. And yet, as amazing as that guy's sacrifice was, Jesus' one is even bigger. Even bigger. Because let's think about what Jesus says and then what Jesus does. He says he's the good shepherd. He says he's the beautiful shepherd. He says he's the ultimate shepherd. And he will lay down his life for his sheep. And despite what people write in a few books about ancient shepherds, because I've done a lot of reading on ancient shepherds this week, they talk about how they would face danger for their sheep. I found myself doubting that most shepherds would die for their sheep. Found myself doubting that. Because, yes, their sheep were their wealth and they were their treasure. But I think any one of us, if we were a shepherd and we were surrounded by wolves and we knew, well, this is not going to go particularly well, I think the majority of us would say, Which sheep is the weakest and the least valuable? Let's lob him to the wolves. That's what I'd do. I'd do that in a heartbeat. And I think that's how most shepherds would act in that situation. If it came down to the crunch, if it was them or the sheep, they would sacrifice a sheep. Jesus is the ultimate shepherd, and he doesn't do that. I don't think any other shepherd would do this. Jesus says, when ultimate danger comes the way of my sheep, because they're my treasure, because I know them, I'm going to do whatever it takes to save them. I think he goes far beyond whatever any human being would do. That is how you know Jesus is your ultimate shepherd. That's how you know you can trust him with every part of your life, because he would do that for you. He would literally die for you. That's why he's worth following. He sees you completely. He saw the danger that was coming your way, which was God's justice at everything that you've got wrong. And he said, I will let that fall on me. So as we close this part of the service, turn with me to Isaiah 53. It's going to be on the screen if you struggle to find it. But from verse 5 onwards, this is a part of the Bible which is describing what Jesus would one day do. He says this: he was pierced for our transgressions. That's what happened to Jesus. He was pierced because we get things wrong. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brings us peace was put on him, and by his wounds we're healed. We are like sheep who have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all, or the sin of us all. When Jesus was on the cross, that's when the shepherd is choosing to lay his life down. That's when he's choosing to do it. He speaks some words from the cross in John's Gospel which just say, it's finished. And what we can say about that moment is this: he saw our danger coming, and he said, I'll take that. I'll take that. And so it's finished means it's paid for completely. The danger is past. You can have life to the full. That's what it means. And so I want to encourage you this morning to do something. If you know there's areas of your life where you don't trust Jesus to be your good shepherd, trust him in them. Go wherever he leads you, because he's done that for you, and he's leading you to a place of blessing. That is our good shepherd. Let's pray to him. Lord Jesus, we want to thank you that you didn't just speak words that looked nice on paper but didn't mean anything. You put them into practice. So when you said, I am the good shepherd and I will lay down my life for the sheep, you went through with it. You went through with it in the most extreme way that you could have done. You allowed yourself to take our punishment on yourself so we could experience your freedom. And we want to say this morning, thank you for doing that. We don't understand why you would do that. We know ourselves, you know us better. And we don't understand why you do it for people like us. And yet you did, to make us your treasure. And so we would ask that as we look at words where you say things like, I've come to give you life to the full. I've come to give you rest. Follow me. We ask that we would be able to trust you. And when we read your words where you say from the cross, it is finished, help us to know that it really is, and that we can trust you with everything. So we really do ask that we would be like the sheep in the pen who hear the flute and follow. That we would just trust you to lead us wherever you want to take us, and trust that you'll lead us through desert places to a place of blessing, because that's what you do. Help us to remember that, Lord. And we ask this in your name. Amen.